Acrocanthosaurus.
To the park.
Albertosaurus.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to welcome an Albertosaurus to the park. Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to welcome an Allosaurus to the park.
Archaeomorphism.
Its name might be a mouthful, but the Archaeornithomimus has still managed to capture hearts and minds. And no surprise either. There's something about its bird-like stature that just feels kind of charming, you know?
Atrociraptor.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to welcome an Atrociraptor to the park.
Carnotaurus.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to welcome a Carnotaurus to the park.
Ceratosaurus.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to welcome a Ceratosaurus to the park.
Coelophysis.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to welcome a Coelophysis to the park.
Compsognathus.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to welcome a Compsognathus to the park.
Concavenator.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to welcome a Concavenator to the park.
Deinonychus.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to welcome a Deinonychus to the park.
Dilophosaurus.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to welcome a Dilophosaurus to the park.
Dimetrodon.
When we talk about eye-catching species, the Dimetrodon and its remarkable spine cell is gonna be near the top. Some animals need your attention. This one demands it.
Gallimimus.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to welcome a Gallimimus to the park.
Giganotosaurus.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to welcome a Giganotosaurus to the park.
Guanlong.
What a beautiful dinosaur! Its name? Guanlong. Roughly translates as crown dragon from Chinese. Makes sense too, because that impressive nasal crest.
Herrerasaurus.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to welcome a Herrerasaurus to the park.
Indominus Rex.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to welcome an Indominus Rex to the park.
Indoraptor.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to welcome an Indoraptor to the park.
Metriacanthosaurus.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to welcome a Metriacanthosaurus to the park.
Moros intrepidus.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to welcome a Moros intrepidus to the park.
Ornithomus.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to welcome an Ornithomimus to the park.
Oviraptor.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to welcome an Oviraptor to the park.
Pachycephalosaurus.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to welcome a Pachycephalosaurus to the park.
Triceratosaurus.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to welcome a Proceratosaurus to the park.
Pyraptor.
We are pleased to welcome a Pyroraptor Utahraptor to the park.
Kiangosaurus.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to welcome Changosaurus to the
Scorpius rex.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to welcome a Scorpius Rex to the park.
Struthiomus.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to welcome a Struthiomimus to the park.
Stygimalic.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to welcome a Stygimalic to the park.
Spinosaurus.
We are pleased to welcome the Spinosaurus to the park.
Truden.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to welcome a Troodon to the park.
Tyrannosaurus rex.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to welcome Tyrannosaurus Rex to the park.
Utahraptor.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to welcome a Utahraptor to the park.
Proceratosaurus.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to welcome
Utyrannus.